trying to do nothing but get my grown man number. I ain't trying to hurt you. Only if you want me to. Yeah, something like that. What's happening, baby? I'm Lil Wayne from New Orleans. Fresh out the Navy, now the captain of my own team. Hop in this machine, vanish from the scene. God damn it, I'm so managed. Handle it like a standard. So put your panties in your pants by the trash can. Romance on the floor plans. Yeah, we hold hands while we rollin'. Just trying to keep up with the program. Just trying to sneak up on you like how you doing, ma'am. I'm an old soul and a young man. We got to it and we didn't stop till the birds hit the block, and she ain't never had it like that. Girl, you are so fine. I wish that I could get you over here, girl, tonight. So I could get my grown man on you. You don't know about it. I'm on my grown man. You don't know about it. I could get you over here, girl. You don't know about it. I'm on my grown man. You don't know about it. Now I don't really hit the club, but tonight I'll make an exception. For some reason I can't seem to keep my eyes out your direction. I'm looking at you so hard I could probably catch a charge. Feeling the way you walk when you move your booty, applause. Damn, I gotta keep my composure. Gotta attack my mission, handle business like a soldier. Young man, young money, but the money long. Currency, the hot spitter, so grown. And your perception of me is so wrong. Don't worry about what you heard about me and them other birds. Might have done a little dirt and left a few of them hurt, but whatever has occurred, they all got what they deserved. And you don't rock like them, I can see it in your eyes. If you ain't good for me, then you wearing a disguise. Cause tonight you looking like Miss Right, and I swore to be a player for life, but I changed for you. Girl, you are so fine. I wish that I could get you over here, girl, tonight. So I could get my grown man on you. You don't know about it. I'm on my grown man. You don't know about it. I could get you over here, girl. Real players. I'm on my grown man. You don't know about it. You ain't a woman, you a baby girl, living in the latest world, and I'm a grown man. The women understand. See what I go through, it's what I owe you. So you should throw that ass back to me right now. Yeah, fly boy, baby, sit back, relaxing. Cruise with a nigga, destination satisfaction. Whose is it, baby? She say Weezy fucking baby. I say yes and fucking D. She say don't you ever leave. I say, but I got money on my mind. Then I tell her never mind, and we do it one more time. Yeah, for a large amount of time, long and won't stop till daytime. Come home. Yeah, girl, you are so fine. I wish that I could get you over here, girl, tonight. So I could get my grown man on you. You don't know about it. I'm on my grown man. You don't know about it. I could get you over here, girl. You don't know about it. I'm on my grown man. You don't know about it. Grown man on you. Damn, look. That right there? That's the sunset, girl. Get your visor. Where's those Chanel shades that get you? You're always losing things, and I'm always buying new things. I come a long way, I remember that block? Look at you think you're all grown. You ain't a woman, you a baby girl, living in the ladies' world, and I'm a grown man. The women understand. See what I go through, it's what I owe you, and you should throw that ass back to me right now.
We Japanese still. You getting cooked in front of your family like a Japanese meal. It's just soup the hibachi, and none of you niggas can stop me. But can't help but watch me. So look, bro, I had to do today's video. I've been sitting on this idea, conceptualizing this idea for this video, and I wanted to bring this out to show the flavor of human ancestry and American ancestry, and talk about something that rarely gets talked about. That's why I picked the song about grown man, because at the same time, you guys forget the interactions between humans. The male and female interaction is going to be sexual. And what happened in the past is why we have the progeny or the people we have today. So there are people today that identify as white American, that identify as quote unquote Caucasian, even though that's the erroneous title. They identify these things and these titles and these nomers, and the idea of racial purism has prevailed in today's world. So they think that if I call myself white, if I call myself black, if I identify, or the social milieu that we're involved in, the social climate that we're involved in is categorizing black and white as a certain ancestry or ancestor, or a race where it stretches back into millennia, several millennia. Then what happens is they get confused during the age of DNA testing when they get their results and it says something other than that social climate accepts, other than what, so for instance, most people that see black people today, or people that are categorized as black, are going to ultimately associate them with African ancestry, specifically Sub-Saharan African ancestry. Most people that see people that are categorized as white, they're going to ultimately associate their ancestry strictly with European ancestry. But here's the issue: race is a made-up construct, and we're trying to superimpose made-up constructs onto biology. That just doesn't work, because people that are white, some of those people actually do have Sub-Saharan African ancestry and ancestry from other places other than Western Europe. Vice versa, people that are black, some of those people, some of those individuals have ancestry that is not congruent with that of a Sub-Saharan African. It could be North African, could be European, could be Russian, could be Chinese. Like the Wayne brothers, they have a Chinese haplogroup. So their ancestry on their paternal side stretches back to East Asians in some shape, form, or fashion. The ideas of race and categorizing people based off color has pretty much confused most of the people that are taking these DNA tests, because they're trying to use their understanding of race to understand deep ancestry and bioancestry, and it's just messing everybody up. So I want to do today's video about the white Americans with Sub-Saharan African ancestry, because we talk a lot about the black Americans with Western European ancestry, and I think it's a very intriguing topic to discuss, because there are many people, especially when you're black, Hebrew, Israelite, Afrocentric, all these people are the devil, and a lot of times you share ancestry with those people, and a lot of times those people share ancestry with the group that you hold to be sacred or sacrament or whatnot. And that's what we're going to discuss today. Real quick, just to touch on the African American side real quick, let's go to this article to open things up. And within this article here, it discusses the genetic matrix of African Americans and other groups as well. But I want to point this out for African Americans, just to give a refresher that African Americans are not a homogenous group, just like white Americans are not a homogenous group. This paper is a continuum of admixture in the Western Hemisphere revealed by African Diaspora Genome, published in 2016. The article will be within the description of the video, by the way, so anyone can go read, fact check. But I want to go to the portion where it talks about the admixture of haplogroups amongst African Americans. And as you can see here, in African Americans, 59.8% of the haplotypes are African E1b, or 20.6% are European R1b. So there you go. You see the admixture there within African Americans. You do have African Americans that are indeed descendants of Europeans, right? And 19.6% are other types that are mostly European. So give or take, rough estimate, about 40% of the male population of African Americans descend from a group outside of Sub-Saharan Africans. That's a large chunk of people. We did the math before, 40%, probably be 7 to 8 million of the 20 million African American males, showing there was a lot of mixing going on. That was a substantial enough mixing going on that it can affect 40% of the current African American population. But as you can see, when we look at the European haplogroups as well, you do see that they do have some kind of African American, and that's what we're going to get. Well, African ancestry as well. We're going to get into that because you see people that are ostensibly quote unquote white or Caucasian, erroneous title, having African or exhibiting African ancestry. Okay. Anyway, let's go to the next article real quick. And this was on the 23andMe website, and it's dealing with the one drop rule. You know, the one drop rule has a very dubious history in the Americas. It basically would say that anyone that had one African ancestor within their genealogy would be considered Black. And the purpose of that was to, you know, nullify or reject certain groups, you know, mainly Native Indigenous Indians, of claiming land rights and government allocations of funds and stuff of that nature. They went and used the court to say, hey, the one drop rule or the law of hypo descent, to say, hey, if you got any Black descendants, you're not Black ancestors, then you're not Native Indigenous Indian. Therefore, you can't claim these rights. So it's a very dubious and nefarious thing with one drop rule. But just like most of the nefarious and dubious things that came from rednecks of the past, they're cherished today within the Black American community, which makes no sense. And it just shows the lack of history, the lack of understanding of our history in the Americas, and the dearth of understanding the information to know what actually took place 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, or 100 years ago, which is very vital and important, especially when we're talking about DNA testing, because there's certain people that still believe in that one drop madness. But anyway, be that as it may, exceptions to the one drop rule is the name of the title. DNA evidence of African ancestry in European Americans. So again, we speak to ad nauseum about the African Americans that have or exhibit European ancestry at a high clip. But it's time to talk about the reverse of that, the vice versa of that, the African ancestry in European Americans. So you can see there's Rich Kittles was involved in this as well. Several other geneticists were involved. Introduction: genetic studies have revealed that most African Americans trace the majority, 80% on average, of their ancestry to Western Africa. What is this talking about? Their autosomes, their indirect ancestry, right? Most of the remaining ancestry traced to Europe, and the paternal lines traces to Europe more often than the maternal lines. We discussed this before because there's a sex bias introgression in the African American ancestral gene pool. We see more European males mixing with African females than vice versa. Does not mean it didn't happen on the other side, but it definitely occurred more with European men versus European men with African women versus African women with European men. European women with African men. And that's what we're going to discuss today, the vice versa of that. It says this genetic pattern is consistent with the one drop rule, a social history wherein children born with one or more ancestors of African descent were considered Black in the United States. The question of how many European Americans have DNA evidence of African ancestry has been studied far less. That's what we're going to talk about today. Although recent estimates for several Southern European populations indicate that between 1% and 3% of ancestry traces to Africa. Here we describe the analysis of genome-wide data for over 98,000 individuals. The aim of this study is to characterize the distribution of African ancestry among those likely to self-identify as European American or of European descent. The findings have implications for the type of personal discoveries individuals can make through exploring their DNA. Methods: we examined genetic ancestry of 98,240 customers of 23andMe who had consented to participate in research. The vast majority reside in the United States. We identified a subset of individuals with genetic evidence of fewer than 1 in 16 great-great-grandparents tracing their ancestry to the continental region other than Europe. Estimated African ancestry is less than 5%. I want y'all to remember that 5% number because we're going to be dealing with the Ydna here in a minute and showing that that's about roughly how many African Ydnas that we find amongst the European male population. Principal component analysis and report indicate that most of these individuals trace ancestry primarily to Northern Europe. These individuals are likely to consider themselves to be entirely European descent, at least within the last 500 years. We conducted 2 analyses to understand what fraction of this group has genetic evidence of some ancestry tracing recently to Africa. We first identified individuals whose autosomal DNA indicates that they are predominantly of European ancestry, but who carry either a mitochondrial DNA, remember the mitochondrial DNA deals with the women, or Y chromosome haplogroup that is highly likely to have originated in Sub-Saharan Africa, which is table 1 here. Since that region was a primary source of enslaved individuals brought to America. Before we continue reading, what does this do for the talks of reparations? If you know that white Americans, which you guys like to point the finger to and say, you're the reason that this happened, these horrible atrocities happen. What does this do for the talks of reparations in regards to people that literally descend from slaves but are considered to be of a different ethnic group or a different social classification? What does that do for them? Are they entitled for money? Do you feel that they should be entitled for money? And if not, why? Is it because they're considered Caucasian, white, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Don't get too far ahead of you. Those things need to be brought into conversation. And it's just going to reveal how racist someone is or how colorist someone is if an actual direct ancestry doesn't mean anything to you. Because if it's about the repartment of people ancestors that were inflicted by it, then it should include them. And I like bringing stuff like this out because a lot of you guys are Umar Johnson-esque in your way of thinking and ideology. And, Blackology, as Roger Craig calls it. And it just reveals how much you guys hinge on the idea of race and these social constructs while claiming not to be a white supremacist or claiming not to be racist. It's just so weird. But anyway, and here are the Y chromosomes considered: A, B2, A1A, E1A, E1B1, E1B1, E2. We're going to be dealing with an article that's going to show a family with E1A and haplogroup B as well, and of course E1B1A, that are all considered white Americans today, but they descend from these paternal lines, and then all of these African maternal lines, L0, L1, L3, L4, L6, and M1. Table 1, Y chromosome and MTDNA haplogroups detected among research participants that are found primarily in Sub-Saharan Africa. The source of most enslaved individuals brought to North America. These haplogroups plus all sub-haplogroups were considered as evidence of African ancestry. We then identified a subset of individuals of European descent with estimates of greater than 0% and up to 5% of their ancestry tracing to Africa. These estimates were obtained from genotype data from between 580,000 and 1 million SNPs via an algorithm similar to structure that underlies 23andMe's ancestry painting feature. We also explored the self-reported ancestry of these individuals in order to better understand their perceptions of their ancestry, to assess whether DNA results indicating African ancestry were consistent with their previous understanding or were likely to be seen as novel information or new information. And again, this is the roadblock that we run into, because your perception of reality is not, necessarily reality. And what happens is your DNA doesn't reflect that. We see that a lot with African American males when they take their DNA test and they find out, hey, it says that my DNA haplogroup traces back to Portugal, or it says that it goes back to the Balkans. Y'all have issues with that. You take issue with it because your perception of reality is supposed to reflect and hinge on race and what your ideas of racial pureness is. And if you're considered Black, you're supposed to be this African, the most African, right? And your DNA test doesn't always reflect that. And that's the brick wall that people are running into. Results of the 78,552 23andMe customers likely to consider themselves of European descent, 501, about 2/3 of 1% carry an mtDNA haplogroup indicating of African ancestry. Of approximately 33,000 males, 135, or about 1 in 300, trace their paternal line to Africa. So you do have African American males under this subsample that actually come from paternally and maternally Africans. them African ancestry, which they will ultimately been African Americans, because most likely these would have been Africans brought to America to either work as slaves or for other means. So overall, about 1% of individuals with predominantly European ancestry trace a maternal or paternal line to Africa. It is possible that for some individuals, these haplogroups reflect very deep African ancestry tracing back thousands of years. The estimate of 1%, however, provides an upper bound on the African ancestry tracing back to the interactions between individuals of African and European descent within the United States. So what does this mean? If it's paternally, that means an African man got with most likely a European woman, and they mixed. And they had sex and they had kids. That's the reality of it. Humans have sexual attraction to the opposite sex. They have sex, they copulate and have children. That's what happened.
Ooh, baby, I gotta get you home with me tonight. Ooh, baby, gotta get you home with me tonight.
So again, that's what took place. These people do exist. You know, the white American populace is huge. So you take 1% of that, you're still going to get a considerable amount of people. It says we did identify the set of Europeans and European Americans who have estimates of between 0.5% and 5% ancestry tracing to Africa, leaving out the subset with an estimate of less than 0.5%, since such estimates may be an artifact of the ancestry estimation algorithm. Figure 1 shows the distribution of estimated ancestry for the 2,736 individuals meeting these criteria. And you can see the highest group is going to be the 0.5 to 1% African ancestry. And it gets rare when we get all the way to 5%. It still exists, it's just more rare. It says percentage of individuals likely self-identify as of European descent who have genetic evidence of African ancestry, limited to those with at least 0.5% estimated African ancestry. The data underlying the distribution of figure 1 can be interpreted in terms of number of generations. And I can see most of this ancestry coming from Africans into the European gene pool is coming between 9 and 8 generations ago. Most of it is 7 and 8 generations, meaning you're more likely to mix during this period than recent times. Why is that? Is the question. Because the ideas of how we feel about miscegenation and stuff, we don't start seeing those ideas really have control and power and influence until later on. We're talking about the Civil War years. But at the onset, they didn't give a damn about that. They were having sex. They were having sex. They were mixing. As we can see, it was more likely to happen 8 to 9 generations ago than 4 to 5 generations ago, because the ideas that we have today, hold on today, were not as prevalent 8 to 9 generations ago, or even 7 to 8, or even 6 to 7 generations ago. As you get closer to the present day, that's when we're getting more ideas reinforcing miscegenation. You had people like Marcus Garvey, out of all people, Marcus Garvey against mulattoes. Like, he hated mulattoes, right? He hated the idea of miscegenation. He hated those things. He was a racial purist. He was a neo-Nazi, right? And that was what? Within the last 100 years. That was within the last 100 years. He believed that, and he himself is a product of this mixing that we see 8 to 9 generations ago, 7 to 8 generations ago, 6 to 7 generations ago. He himself is an R1B carrier, meaning he comes from Western Europe. His male line comes from Western Europe, and he was up there speaking against mulattoes and intermixing with other quote-unquote races, when he himself is a product of interracial sex. He himself is a child of a West European man. So those ideas started getting steam and more popularity and being more prevalent in society more recently. Because as we can see, the intermixture rates were higher 6, 7, 8, 9 generations ago. That's why you see it. Right? That's where you usually see these other haplogroups introgressing into these groups around this period of time, because the idea, the social milieu was not the same. The social climate was not the same. These ideas didn't get weight and gravity until more recent. We keep going. I can go on a tangent on that for about 2 hours straight. It says percentage of individuals likely to self-identify as of European descent who have genetic evidence of African ancestry a given number of generations in the past. I believe, again, you see it more likely to happen 8 to 9 generations ago than 4 to 5 generations ago. And that has a lot to do with the social climate, a lot to do with the ideas of miscegenation, a lot to do with the ideas of race itself, because you gotta understand the ideas of race is fairly new. The way that's constructed today, it's fairly new. 17th, 18th century Germans bringing that into play. That's what, then you start seeing it, a downward trend of this intermixing. It said the set of individuals within the descriptions of figure 1 and 2 subset constitutes about 3.5% of individuals likely to be aware only of European ancestry. The majority, 75% of the group, has a very small estimated fraction of African ancestry, about 0.5%, likely to reflect African ancestry over 7 generations, roughly 200 years ago. For anybody that's new to this, generations in these terms is like 29 years. So you times that by 7, and that's how you get to 200. Our exploration of the ancestry reported by a subset of the individuals indicated that only about 0.2% of individuals with estimate African ancestry between 0.5 and 5% identify as having ancestry other than European. So most of them that do have the African ancestry, all they know how to identify as, and it's largely due to our social climate and the ideas against miscegenation, is as European, and they don't know where this African ancestry is coming from, because how racist this country has gotten in the last 100 years, right? And the way things were taught. You gotta understand, civil rights happened in 1964, so we're just now getting away from that, but those ideals still linger, and we can see it still lingering through these people that are taking tests. And the ideas and their arguments and gripes against the results, which we're going to get into a little later. It said that fraction increased as the percentage of estimated proportion of African ancestry increases. Discussion. About 1% of individuals likely to identify as only of European descent have Y chromosome or MTDNA haplogroup associated primarily with Sub-Saharan Africa. Again, there are white people that are walking around. There's a considerable amount of them, because 1% of, I think, 180 million is a lot, right? They're walking around with either African male ancestry, which is shown through the Y chromosome, or African female ancestry. We estimated that overall 3 to 4% of 23andMe customers with predominantly European ancestry have genetic patterns suggesting relatively recent, within the last 10 generations, ancestry tracing to Africa. This fraction is far lower than the genetic estimates of European ancestry in African Americans, which is closer to 20%. This finding is consistent with the social history of the United States, wherein individuals with at least one ancestor of African descent were considered to be Black. That's the one-drop rule. However, the analysis indicates that a small percentage of mixed-race individuals were integrating into the European American community 200 years ago and earlier, prior to and during the era of slavery in the United States. And again, I already explained to you, went on a rant on why that's the case, because those ideas of miscegenation were not strongly concrete yet. Anecdotal evidence indicates that individuals discovering DNA evidence of African ancestry have been prompted to conduct genealogical research to search for the identity of their African ancestors. We're going to deal with some of that, right? So another piece of information, and again, all these links to the articles will be within the description of the video, so you guys can click each article that I'm dealing with today and go read them for yourselves. This article here I brought up on the last video. It gives you the percentages of Y DNA, MTDNA, and autosomal DNA. Within the Europeans, they have a very small percentage of African autosomal DNA. Within Europeans, they have a very smaller, even smaller percentage of mitochondrial DNA, meaning African female lineages. It does exist, it's smaller. Then the male, they have a considerable 5%, roughly 5% Y or male ancestry coming from Sub-Saharan Africans or Africans in general. Now, I want you guys to visualize that. So how many African males, how many European or white American males are there? So we're going to type that in. Because you guys look at the number of percentage, you'd be like, oh, that's a low integer, and that's very small. That's a drop in the bucket. That's a lot of people, man. White American males. Let me see what they got. So white American males. Let me type in demographics. Come up. I know it's like 118 million. Yeah, all of this all of this political stuff going on. I just need one source real quick. Hold on. Let me do this. Demographics, 118 million. Let me do it like that. See if it comes up. Yo, Google is playing games with me, man. Google is playing games. I'm usually able to pull this up, but I believe it's like 118 million. All these different damn social arguments instead of me give me the damn number. I believe it's like 118 million last time I checked. So if you take 118 million and you times that, somebody in the chat, you guys can fact check me on that, but I believe it's around there. 118 million times 5%. What do we get? So 118 million, given the male population, the white male population roughly, and we put these numbers of Ydna data, and we superimpose the Ydna percentages to that number, you got about 5,900,000 white male Americans that are African, Sub-Saharan African descent. That's a lot of people. Yeah, about 6 million people. That's a lot of people. That's why you can't just go off the percentage number. Oh, the percentage number is low. That's a lot of people. And white Americans are the biggest group. White Americans are the biggest group. So you take the percentage of that, and then, you can see how many people are projected to have this type of ancestry. Remember, there's only about 20 million African American males, and only about 12 million of them are African paternally. Only about 12 million, about 8 million are European paternally. So if it's roughly 6 million white Americans that could possibly go around, that are walking around with paternal African ancestry, that's about half of the amount of African Americans, males, that have that African ancestry. That's why, again, you just can't judge people off phenotype. Phenotype is polygenic. You can't just go look at people's facial features or their physical attributes and say what they are.
Physiognomy.
You can't just look at the physiognomy, which also has a racist history as well. Thinking the way people look, is indicative of their character or ethnic origin. Again, that's the issue. Here we have a lot of people that rely on
physiognomy,
and none of that stuff shows you deep ancestry. None of it. Because if you crunch these numbers together, you're going to see that there are a considerable amount of people that don't fit the status quo, what you think an African should look like, that are actually descendants of Africans. And we've discussed this before on the channel to ad nauseam. So what happens? You get articles like this. You get articles of people being confused like this on Eupedia. Here's an article of a Eupedia member, and she's confused. She allowed her son to take a 23andMe test, and she does not agree, or she does not understand, rather, why her son will be considered Sub-Saharan African. Let's read it. She said, my son took the 23andMe test. The results came back very, very confusing. His haplogroup came back E1B1A with the EU175 SNP. But what was odd is it said it was without some markers. When I researched that, it had only been discovered in one other person in a study in Africa. However, this autosomal DNA, and this is why I tell you guys, You guys put so much emphasis on autosomal DNA because that's what's been commercialized and that's what's been popularized. And a lot of times you guys run to autosomal DNA because it favors your idea of race. At least you think it favors your idea of race. You're like, oh, well, I'm black. I got Sub-Saharan African. Most of my autosomes Sub-Saharan African. Yeah, that's indirect ancestry being included. So everybody that in your family tree that you did not directly come from is included. So that's why you have Native American ancestry, not necessarily be directly descended from Native American. East Asian ancestry, not directly be descended of East Asian. We can go on and on and on with this. Italian ancestry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Don't get too far ahead of you, right? We can do that. So she's confused, like, why doesn't this haplogroup, like Teo Twin said one time, your haplogroup should reinforce your autosomal? No, it does not have to do that. That's a rule you just made up in your head. You can have somebody, again, as we saw, this was more popular to do or more likely to happen 7 to 8 generations ago. We're talking about 200 plus years ago. So if this haplogroup or this ancestor that was African did not enter the gene pool until like 200 years ago, well, duh, you're not going to have any autosomal remnants of it because it happened too long ago. Autosomal DNA has a range within 5 to 8 generations. So you go beyond that, it's harder to detect that type of ancestry. So of course, that's all this is saying is this ancestor came before that time frame where we can capture and understand when these autosomal segments came within your genome. So she says, however, his autosomal DNA was 99.1% Northern European, with 0.9% unidentifiable. The breakdown was just as we expected from genealogical research, 50% German from Rhineland, 11% Scandinavian and Copenhagen, and the rest from the British Isles. How is this all possible? It's very simple why it's possible. It's called a human mechanism known as sexual reproduction. That's it. There's nothing to be confused about this. The reason why you have people that are confused, as I've been saying throughout the duration of this video, is because of the idea of race. My son's white. How the hell does he have an African ancestor? That's basically what she's saying in a nutshell. When none of that stuff has anything to do with bioancestry, bioancestral connection. It has nothing to do with your ancestors having sex 300, 400 years ago and ultimately producing you or your child. Our family immigrated from Germany, farthest line 150 years ago. They live in isolated German communities with no possible chance of interacting with a person from that haplogroup. You don't know that. How do you know that? Further, if they have it, would have shown up in the DNA test he did, and nearly all my family did. He's the only one to take 23andMe, and everyone else used Ancestry. So what does that tell you? You need to get your other family to do 23andMe or Familytree DNA. Why? Because Ancestry does not give you a haplogroup. All the autosomal results match each other. Further, all the pictures of my grandparents are blue-eyed, blonde-headed Northern Germans, as am I and my kids. Again, she's using race to reinforce ancestry. It does not work that way. Oh, what did I just bring up? What did I just bring up? Oh, they're blue-eyed, and they're white, and they're pale, they're blonde. How could he have an African ancestor? This is what she's relying on.
Physiognomy.
This is exactly what the problem is. When y'all take your DNA test, you need to start with a fresh white board, a fresh, clean paper. Because what's happening is you're not emptying your cup, which is your understanding. You're just using it, what you already understand, or what you think you understand, your perception of reality, and that's overpowering the reality, the actual result that she got from her son, which was an African paternal ancestry. See how that works? Look, watch this. So we know there was no chance of the haplogroup being acquired in the United States. Well, the DNA test would have picked it up in the last 200 years, and it states 0.0% African. Which brings us to Germany. Once again, they came from rural communities that were very homogenous, almost interbred to say the least. The same families immigrated to the U.S. together as well. Or maybe what you understand of what happened didn't happen. Maybe the story, and this goes back to what I was bringing out earlier, and I brought out before. Because somebody said we should just go off with oral testimony all the time. Like, maybe some of these stories have some fabrication to it, or misunderstanding to it, or mythology to it. Maybe they do. You never took that into consideration. Right? So she goes into a list on why she thinks it's wrong. And the people respond to her saying, hey, even if you do think your ancestors come from Germany, you can still have an E1B1A ancestor there. It is possible. The point is, your son is West African. If you follow this story, I believe up to 2024 January, she decided to take a big Ydna test. So we're going to see those results whenever she posts them, and I'll make a video following up on this. Let's go on from here to the next one. Same thing. Confused about Ydna results. Perplexed by Ydna results. He starts off, and this is from Familytree DNA. I am a white male aged at 69. No one in my family or lineage is known to be African, but my results came back with 45 matches, many with 0 distance, and most are African. I had my autosomal test done with Ancestry DNA, and according to that chart, my ancestry is less than 1% African, with 97% being European. So here we go. I'm going to bring up the autosomes first, because just like tail twins, a lot of people don't understand autosomal DNA. They think the autosomal DNA should reinforce the haplogroup. No, that's not how it works. Because if the haplogroup integrates into that population before the time frame of autosomal admixture that you have today, then you're not going to detect it. You're not going to detect it. 5 to 8 generations is that window. It says the results from Familytree DNA shows a haplogroup of EM2 for the most part, and some with EP1 or EP277. There's only one surname match, EP1. I've never heard of him before. Is it possible that my sample could have been mislabeled and that my results belong to someone else? I am never surprised to find varying results, but such a total mismatch is concerning. Your thoughts? Total mismatch of what? I'm going to tell you what the mismatch is. The total mismatch is that it didn't match your expectation on who you thought you were. That was the mismatch. You can read on that they're going back and forth with other people that are joining that forum. So let me go to the next article on this. Or you know what? Let me go to my book real quick. And I brought this up to Reconsidering Race. So this is from the book Reconsidering Race, Social Science Perspectives on Racial Categories in the Age of Genomics. And we're at page 155 to 156. And it deals with the same topic we were just dealing with. These white Americans finding out that they are the progeny of Sub-Saharan African males. Skepticism of results. A small number of respondents, 5.4% for race responses and 6.6% for ethnicity responses. Remember that these are the people that are complaining about this. The people that put emphasis on race and ethnic groups. And that's what we see when we bring up African Americans with European ancestors. It's the same thing. I don't want to acknowledge the lineage that came through forced sexual racial relationship. It's not about acknowledging it. It is what it is. Like, that's your ancestry, regardless. These people have an issue with it because it doesn't fit the idea of race. Wait, no, we're supposed to be pure Europeans. That's going to come up again. This is the same thing going to come up again. So it's usually race responses and ethnicity responses. That's the point. Those two things don't go one-on-one with bioancestry. I just want y'all to know that. Those two things are not harmonious with bioancestry. I got to beat that into y'all head because these people and you people are trying to use that as a metric for identifying ancestry. So let's read this. The respondents that dealt with race and ethnicity were more skeptical about their test outcomes. I wonder why. Many of these participants intended to pursue further research for clarification, as we just read 2 articles. Oh, it's got to be wrong. It's got to be mislabeled. Something's got to be wrong because it did not conform to your idea of race and ethnicity. Since one respondent in California who previously identified as white with Sicilian Italian heritage found the test results illogical. against his existing knowledge and intended to pursue further testing for clarification. Open quote. He says black. See, he goes with race. Black. That's the first thing he says. My results indicate that my haplogroup is E1B1A. As that doesn't seem to make any sense at all. I'm having another test done by a different company, close quote. You see how that works? It's because you're using race as a barometer for your ancestry. That's the problem. Race is not a bioancestry thing. It's a socially constructed thing. You have to treat it as such, or you're going to be like these guys that we're reading about. So from there, let me go down. Let me go down and read this. I don't want to stay too long in this, but let me go down. The analytical engagement with racial ethnic classification. A number of respondents reported that focus on these test results made them critical of the process of grouping and classifying races and ethnicities. Now, this is what should happen when you take a DNA test to get an understanding of DNA. This is what should take place. The knowledge of deep ancestry and historical migrations they acquired destabilized their perception of seemingly cohesive and authoritative racial and ancestral classification processes. 9.7% of participants who identified their race differently and 5.4% of those who identified their ancestry differently provided open-ended responses that challenge the epistemology of human classification, often suggesting that these were not views they held before taking the genetic ancestry test. These responses were more analytical in nature and involved questioning and redefining the utility and accuracy of concepts of race and ancestry. And that's what should happen. We're gaining novel or new information that's showing that our ideas of race are flawed. That's what should happen. But when you have cognitive dissonance, it does not allow you to learn novel or new things. You're just trying to reinforce the old, which is heavily flawed and not based off bioancestry, not based off who you actually descend from. Right? It says here, often suggests that these were not views held before taking the genetic ancestry. Comments often drew upon specific characteristics, skin color versus nationality versus ancestry, to deconstruct common assumptions and ways of knowing. For example, a 70-year-old man in Washington State who identified as Caucasian of English and Swedish Norwegian ancestry prior to testing stated, "First of all, I learned with certainty that we are all Africans. Secondly, my ancestors moved around the globe nearly, and except for recent years, can't truly be identified with individual countries and certainly race. There really isn't such a thing as race, just different facial features, skin colors, etc., that aren't real determinants of race." Close quote. So he got it. He understands. Well, he most likely got an African ancestor or African result. And he was like, listen, ultimately, we're all Africans anyway. Ultimately, we're all Africans anyway. So what's the big deal? And what we're trying to use as a barometer is faulty. It's fake. There's no real such thing as race. All we're doing is judging people off their facial features, their skin color, their morphology, the way they look. That does not really tell you about deep ancestry, now does it? And he learned this through DNA tests. That's what you're supposed to do. Oh, I'm confused. I'm this, that, and the third, because you don't like the results. That's the issue. You can't sit right with the results. All right. So from there, we're going to show examples. Let me go to my Genesis 49's page. Boom. I showed this example on my page here. 23andMe user, she reveals that she's L2A1C. That's what she revealed. That's her maternal DNA. So her mother's mother is a Sub-Saharan African. And look how she looks. Your ideas of race, your ideas of ethnicity, your ideas of skin color, your ideas of grouping people based upon how they look in their morphology are false. Because ultimately, this woman is a Sub-Saharan African descendant. Y'all want me to keep it going? Let's keep it going. This brother right here, ultimately, paternally, is a Sub-Saharan African descendant. His father's side is of EU29, the same claim that I go back to. No matter how he looks, no matter how light his skin is, the skin gradation are being considered pale, this man is an African paternally. And his autosomes are sub-40 Sub-Saharan African. Majority of his autosomes are European, but his paternal ancestry does stem back to African males. Here's another one. White male, African male descendant. Umar Johnson is somewhere crying his eyes out, rolling on the floor laughing. White Americans possess E1B1A. He's 98.6%. As we were reading earlier about a lot of 23andMe users, there's a small percentage of these white people identify as white Americans that are actually coming back with African paternal or MTDNA. 98.6% European, and that's his face, that's his morphology there, that's how he looks. About 1.1% West African DNA, and they believe this was from a Senegalian, Ghanaian population between 1840 and 1750. So that's most likely where he's getting his E1B1A from. He directly descends paternally from Sub-Saharan African males, regardless of what he looks like, regardless of his autosomal accumulation within the last 200 years. Regardless, it is what it is. Race is made up. It's fictive. It's fake. It's false. But people continue to try to use that as a barometer. All right. So from there, let's go to the Cumbes of Brunswick County, North Carolina. This family branch traces their ancestry back to Isham Cumby, who was born a free man of color in 1802. This is what these people look like. Pale skin, finer hair, straight hair. You would not know just by looking at this family that they have an African ancestor. You would not know this just by looking at them or using race as a barometer. You would not know this. Isham lived in the Green Swamp area of Brunswick County, where he had over 100 acres of farmland and started a family. By the 1900 census, Isham's son, Kenneth Cumby, is listed as white. It's listed as white, so he would fit into that racial bracket. Kenneth's great-granddaughter writes here about discovering that the Scottish ancestral story her family had told her was a fabrication. That's why you can't just go off of, well, my family immigrated here 150 years ago from Germany. Then you take a DNA test. No, this can't be true because my family told me. Well, maybe your family told you a damn lie. How about that? Maybe it was made up. Maybe it's modern fiction that your family told you. You can't just go off what your family told you. You have to be able to test these things. And now we're able to test these things by taking your DNA sample and comparing it to other populations. Anyway, her name had indeed been changed over the years, but it used to be Cumbo, not Macumbi. And her paternal ancestors were all listed as mulatto or free people of color on census records that went back to 1790. She had her father take a Y-DNA test. And this should be prevalent in North Carolina, them being free. A lot of the slave owners, a considerable amount of the slave owners in Carolina, well, I got a book on this actually, were people of color. Were freemen actually. Right? So she had her father take a Y-DNA test, the results of which are now part of our project. He was a match for haplogroup B, one of the oldest population groups in the world, originating in Sub-Saharan and West Africa. So this family here, their direct male lineage goes back to haplogroup B, which goes back to Sub-Saharan Africa, West Africa. These are white people with West African, Sub-Saharan African lineages. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. Let's keep going. So it tells you this photo was taken around 1904 in Brunswick County. Anyway, the Cumbers of Richmond County, North Carolina. This family branch traces their ancestry back to James Cumber, born in Robeson County in 1855, to Anna Eliza Cumbo, born about 1838, and an unknown father and who died in Richmond County. He was raised by Aunt Eliza and her husband, Noah Bullard. Cumbo descendants today identify as white and Native American, which is Lumbee. So again, you can't go off of physical appearance, what ethnic group you're in, or what racial group category you think you fit in to talk about bioancestry and deep ancestry. Those things just don't mix. The Lumbee tribe is the largest Native American tribe in North Carolina. Most Cumbo descendants Lumbee trace back to Aunt Eliza Cumbo, along with her close relatives Mary Polly Cumbo Lowry, mother of historical figure Henry Berry Lowry, and Mary's sisters Christian Cumbo Oxidine. James Cumber's paternal ancestry traces back to haplogroup EM2, which dates back 20,000 years to a common ancestor in Sub-Saharan in West Africa. And you can see a picture of his descendants. They're basically white men, hair type, skin color, pale skin color. These people we consider white. They walked around today, you would call them white. And they literally descend from an African ancestor, as we can see here. Which brings me to the next article. Again, within the description of the video, all of the articles are there. The links to the articles are within the description of the video. So y'all remember this, The Root published this. I'm White Was My Ancestor a Free Black Man by Henry Louis Gates Jr., published in 2013. So when I was growing up, there was always whispers of black ancestors among my father's family, but no one would ever discuss it openly. I grew up across the country from that side of the family, so the question never seemed very important. Now, all the family members that might have had some ancestors are deceased. My brother had his DNA analyzed by Ancestry.com in 2008. His paternal haplogroup is E1B1A. Our family name is Wallace. I haven't been able to trace our Wallace family tree back any further than our fourth great-grandfather, John Wallace, who was born before 1785. He was listed in the 1840 census as a free-colored person along with sons John and Noah. The latter is our third great-grandfather. These three people were the only ones in Milton Township, Richland County, Ohio, who were listed as colored. The senior John Wallace was found in the 1850 census, but the sons Noah and John Wallace were listed as white in that all the subsequent censuses until they died, as were all their descendants. So, basically what he's bringing out is a lot of his male ancestry or direct ancestry were considered white after a particular time, after the 1850 census. Before then, free man of color. Now they're being considered white. Noah was born, and this goes back to that trend I was telling you, like, it got progressively more races, more recently than we see before the 1700s. We see during that period there were more mixing going on because of this. It says Noah was born in 1813 in Delaware and John in 1805 in Maryland. They both married Bowser sisters, I presume, most likely in Maryland in 1833 and 1828, respectively. 23andMe has given me racial admixture test results of 2.3% Sub-Saharan African and 97.5% European composition. When I worked that backward, I believe Noah had to have about 75% African ancestry. This scenario seems unusual to me. I would be very interested in any kind of insight that you might have. I would also like to have a reading list to help me understand the history of the free colored persons at the beginning of the 19th century. Sylvia Wallace snippet. The scenario described is not unusual as it might seem to you. As previously noted, 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro column, geneticist Joanna Mountain of 23andMe.com estimates that 3 to 4% of Americans who are likely to consider themselves to be all white do have some African ancestry. We have also noted in another Amazing Facts column that there were thousands of free blacks like your ancestors living in America before slavery ended. In fact, by 1860, there were a total of 488,000 free blacks living in the United States, about 10% of the entire black population. Of those, 226,000 lived in the North and 261,000 lived in the South. In 15 states, Delaware, Kentucky, Maryland, Missouri, North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Texas, plus the District of Columbia. And learning more about your ancestors, you may find it useful to look at the experience of free blacks in each state which they live. Then he goes into the Wallace family. You guys can read this on your own. But the point is, you have this white male discovering that his ancestry goes back to a Sub-Saharan African male. No matter how you look, no matter how much autosomal accumulation that he has as European, that fact will never change. He is a direct descendant of an African male. All right, so from there, move on to this article. This is dealing with African DNA in the British Isles, but it's still prevalent to the topic. And we all know who Oluda Ekuyama is, especially Black Hebrew Israelites, you know. White slave owner registers from 1834 in England. In a recent project index study, their contents has raised consciousness about slavery and how intertwined slavery was through the Caribbean sugar production to all the British Isles. DNA is telling a story too. While the slave owners registers speak to the ownership of slaves in the Caribbean by Britons, those weren't the only slaves. I have done several DNA reports in the past decade for people who receive unexpected results. By unexpected, I'm referring to clearly African haplogroups in Europe, primarily in the British Isles, found in people who are just as clearly white today, whose ancestors have been considered as such for generations. Furthermore, their autosomal DNA generally shows no trace or occasionally shows minute amounts of African heritage. It is clearly there as proven by Y and mitochondrial DNA. And this is what we've been talking about throughout the duration of the video. You got these white people today with Sub-Saharan African ancestry. When these people are found in the U.S. and their ancestors have been here for generations, especially in the slave owning area, my first thought is always that perhaps the genealogy is an error, or that there was an undocumented adoption that would never show in genealogical records. But when the people are not in the U.S. and their ancestors have never lived outside of Europe, and are well documented, the results are impossible to explain away or rationalize in that fashion. Even in America, you can't just brush it off. It's still what it is. These people come from Africans. I'm also not referring to haplogroup EM215, old E1B1B, or EM35, or E1B1B1, which is known to be North African or Berber, found in the Mediterranean basin. This haplogroup is found sparsely in England, likely due to Roman legions who arrived and stayed, or at least left some of their Y DNA behind. Stephen Bird wrote the paper about this title, haplogroup E3B1A2, as possible indicator of settlement of Roman Britain by soldiers of Balkan origin. I'm talking about the haplogroups that are unquestionably Sub-Saharan African origin, such as Y-DNA EM2, that's E1B1A, or old E1B1A, now EV38, and often the mitochondrial DNA groups such as L1, L2, L3, meaning that they originated with women, not men. This begs the question of how those haplogroups came to be embedded in the British population long enough ago that there's no record that the people who carried them were not white. In other words, the person who brought that haplogroup to the British Isles arrived long ago, many generations. I've also found this a bit confounding because while England was indeed heavily intertwined in the slave trade, England never had the space or need to employ slaves in the way that they were engaged on large plantations in the Caribbean or the southern U.S. Furthermore, England had its own surplus of people that they were trying to send elsewhere, which was one of the benefits of colonization. You could send your undesirables to populate your colonies. For example, those pesky recusant Catholics who refused to convert settled in Maryland. Many people convicted of small crimes such as my Joseph Rash for stealing 2 bags of malt were transported to the colonies, in his case, Virginia. We know that there were some Africans in Elizabethan England, although those records are almost incidental, few and far between. Africans have been in England since the 12th century, but it wasn't until slavery began in earnest that their numbers increased. At this point, blacks in England were mostly novelties and were often owned by captains of slave ships and occasionally sold on the quay of coastal cities like Bristol. Although not widespread, slavery was practiced in England until 1772 when the Somerset case effectively determined that chattel slavery was not supported by English law. This legally freed all slaves in England and not in actual practice. Slaves in England at that time were mostly domestic servants and flocked to be baptized in the hope it would ensure their freedom. The good news is that those baptisms created records. Buried in the details of the Somerset case, the arguments are important tidbits. Let me go and read the rest. James Somerset, a slave, was purchased in Massachusetts and brought to England by his master, Charles Stewart. James escaped, was captured, and was going to be shipped to the Caribbean by Stewart and sold as a plantation slave. However, while in England, James had been converted to Christianity, and his 3 godparents, upon his baptism, filed suit claiming that while he may have been a slave when brought to England, that English law did not support slavery, and he was therefore not a slave in England. It could not be shipped against his will to the Caribbean to be sold. This was not a humanitarian case per se, but a case about law and legal details. Somerset advocates argued that while colonial laws might permit slavery, neither the common law of England nor any law made by the Parliament recognized the existence of slavery, and slavery was therefore unlawful. The advocates also argued that English contract law did not allow for any person to enslave himself, nor could any contract be binding without the person's consent. When the two lawyers of Charles Stewart, the owner, put forth their case, they argued that property was paramount and that it would be dangerous to free all black people in England, who numbered at the time approximately 15,000. That's the information I was looking for. There were 15,000 African descendant slaves in England in 1772, given that most were domestic servants. The females would have been subject to whatever their owner wanted to impose upon them, including sexual advances. Let's face it, there were a lot more English men available in English than African men, so it was very likely that the children of enslaved women would have been fathered by white men, whether by consensual or non-consensual means. The half-white children would also have been enslaved. Now, this is why I wanted to bring this article up, to break this math down right quick. At least until 1772, and if they were also the born children from an English male, the offspring would have been 25% African and 75% English. Within another generation, they would have looked white, and their African heritage would have been forgotten. And that's the point I want to bring out here. This admixture between Africans and Europeans happened so long ago. They keep having children, and that progeny continues to have children that they're going to be considered to be of that populace, be considered to be of that group. So if you have African admixture coming into a quote-unquote white or European populace, marry into that group, and then that child continues to marry into the European group, they're going to continue to get more and more white, quote-unquote, like the surrounding population, to the point where what it says, the African heritage would have been forgotten. That's what we see with these white Americans that have Sub-Saharan African ancestry. I don't know anything about African ancestry because it has been forgotten. A lot of that dealing with the social climate, social environment, how we view race, and we think that racial purism is real and that people have immutable characteristics. A lot of that has to do with it. So after a while, you're going to see these people look similar to that population, as we can see with this example here. It says at least until their descendants 8 or 10 generations later took a mitochondrial Y-DNA test and turned up with a confusing African result. That's the point I want to get out of this paper here. And that's what we've been reading all day, right? Let me close some of these windows. All right, so from there, let's go to the next article. And the next article is the Big Y 700 confirms African ancestry for old Jock Perkins family. Why is this huge? Why is this integral to the conversation of white American males or white American people in general having Sub-Saharan African DNA? Because the same theme pops up. The idea that, hey, something has to be wrong, or my ancestors were all European, they were all white. Look at how I look today. I got blonde hair, I got blue eyes, aquiline nose. Look at my face. There's nothing African about me. The same issue comes up here. But they were able to take this big Y, and this big Y test. If you can afford it, I advise you to take it. Pretty much shut down the whole argument, right? Join Laurie as she explained how Big Y 700 helped her discover her father's African ancestry in connection to old Jock Perkins. All too often, there is no historical documentation of pivotal events in the lives of Americans with African ancestry. These documentation gaps can create difficult brick walls in the family trees. For descendants of Joshua Old Jock Perkins family tree DNA, Big Y 700 tests help break through 2 brick walls. 1 brick wall remains. Our Big Y 700 testing project is ongoing. Identifying brick walls in the old Jock Perkins family tree. Brick wall 1. Did old Jock have African ancestry? This was a question. They didn't even believe he had African ancestry. They didn't believe their family had African ancestry. Most likely because they were white. Because they looked at their skin, look how we look. We're European. We got blonde hair. We got blue eyes. Look at us. Look at my facial structure. Look. That's all they went off of. That's pretty much what it was. As we've been reading all day, that's what it is. The ideas of race and ethnic groups, the physical characteristics and attributes trump ancestry. That's how it works. It should be the other way around. Despite documented evidence identifying Joshua Old Jock Perkins, 1732 to 1801, as a free person of color. Some descendants insist he had wholly European ancestry. Why DNA testing conclusively proved Old Jock was of African descent on his paternal line. So there's no way around it. Took the DNA test, found out that Old Jock was actually African, even though his family, the descendants, was like, no, my ancestor was wholly European. No, he was African, as the DNA test revealed. Brick wall 2 proving a relationship between Old Jock and his presumed sons. Old Jock had 5 sons: George, Isaac, Jacob, Joshua Jr., and Lewis. Circumstantial evidence suggests each of the 5 sons' identities, but documented evidence to prove their relationship with Old Jock does not exist. When combined with circumstantial evidence, the Big Y700 test proved all 5 men were descended from Old Jock. That's what DNA tests do, and here's the results here. All their DNA went back. And here's the haplogroup here. I'm not going to say, I'm not going to go too far into this, but the haplogroup that was labeled here was EFT 372640. And what does this go back to? EM132. This is that E1A haplogroup I brought up earlier. I said we're going to deal with. So basically, this family of white Americans all trace back to a paternal man from Western Africa of E1A. You know, now you find E1A amongst the Dogon, you find E1A amongst various Niger Congo speakers. You find E1A in North Africa as well. But most likely this is of a West African derivation, right? So let's go back. And then it also talks about the Drukidal connection, and they're still trying to figure that out. My genealogy research started with my dad's curiosity. My dad was young when his white-skinned, red-haired mother died. After her death, he lived off on with his maternal Perkins grandmother. She wasn't much of a talker, frustrated by how little he knew about his family background. My dad devoted his retirement years to family history research focused on his mother's Perkins family. From 1732 to present, no one in my Perkins line has died in the place they were born. Early generations moved state to state over and over again, always to their latest frontier. Because my dad researched their genealogical records were digitized, he spent many vacations traveling to places his Perkins family had lived, searching for clues about their lives. During his travels, he heard rumors of dark-skinned family members, but found no evidence the rumors were true. My dad grew up believing his Perkins roots were in England. By the late 1980s, my dad had built a solid documented record for George Perkins, my 5th great-grandfather, born in 1754 in South Carolina. However, my dad hit a brick wall when he tried to identify George's father. And as you can see, this is where all his family were considered, mostly in the United States, some in Canada, and some in Alaska. And then they go through this whole journey, how my dad broke his brick wall when he found records of Old Jock Perkins. Land and tax records from 1787 to 1807 placed George and several other Perkins men in Washington County and Carter County, Tennessee. After finding these records, my dad took a research trip to Knox County Public Library in Tennessee, where he found the McClung Historical Collection. In the McClung's collection, he found a genealogical treasure trove, detailed notes from Perkins versus White, an 1858 trial that litigated the Perkins family race. The case arose in July 1858 when Old Jock's great-grandson brought a libel action suit against his neighbors for repeatedly saying the Perkins families were Negroes. According to Tennessee law, they were prohibited from owning their stores and selling their equipment, should be indicted for crimes of living with their white wives. So what is this showing you? This is showing you that these people of African descent that were E1A carriers were marrying what? White wives. That's why it shouldn't be surprising when you get an unexpected haplogroup, because these people were still having sex and intermixing.
Ooh, baby, I gotta get you home with me tonight. Ooh, baby, I gotta get you home with me tonight.
So this is very simple. This is not a very, deep calculus problem here. People had sex, made your ancestors, which made you. It's just that simple. This Sub-Saharan African man or descendant had sex. They had white wives and made a bunch of descendants that look quote unquote white. In other words, old Jock was stroking.
When I start making love, I don't just make love, I be stroking. That's what I be doing. I be stroking. I stroke it to the east, and I stroke it to the west. I stroke it to the woman that I love the best. I be stroking. Let me ask you something. What time of the day do you like to make love? Have you ever made love just before breakfast? Have you ever made love while you watch the Late Late Show? Well, let me ask you this. Have you ever made love on a couch? Well, let me ask you this. Have you ever made love on the back seat of a car? I remember one time I made love on the back seat of a car, and the police came and shined his light on me, and I said, I'm stroking. That's what I'm doing. I be stroking. I stroke it to the east, and I stroke it to the west. I stroke it to the woman that I love the best. I be stroking.
So it's that simple, man. It's that simple. Groups had sex. People from different groups had sex with each other, produce the line that you come from. That's it. There's nothing mythical about this. There's nothing deep about this. This is not a calculus problem. It's just that simple, man. People had sex with each other and produced you. That's why you have people like this today that are considered white American, but ultimately descend from Sub-Saharan Africans. I'm going to give you another example of this. I got it down here somewhere. Someone else with African ancestry look primarily white. Where's the Hispanic brother at? I think I showed him here in here before. But I mean, this is not something hard to get at all. This should be very simple. The only reason it's being hard it's hard to understand because your idea of race. Once you obliterate your ideas of race and your ideas of racial purism, your ideas of physiognomy, your ideas of physical traits and ethnic groups, you completely obliterate this. Because at the end of the day, we can understand that guy's a Native American descendant. That's haplogroup A carrier. This brother here, El Salvadorian with paternal haplogroup E1B1A, maternal C1B, basically African on his dad's side, Native American on his mother's side. And this is how he looks. That's how he looks. E1B1A. You can't just go off how people look today and determine their bio ancestry. Does not work that way. Does not work that way at all. And I gave you several cases here showing you white Americans. I gave you the figure number of how many white American males are possibly descendants of Sub-Saharan African males. We got to about roughly 6 million, 5 million and some change. So again, the point was established: white Americans with Sub-Saharan African ancestry. Now, you got people like Drukidal that makes arguments for EZ365, certain clades, and try to say that it's North African or whatnot. That could very well be, but that wouldn't make up the bulk. We know if you're American, U.S. American, you most likely got your ancestry via someone from West Africa and other African, North African, East African, South Africans also is possible as well. But the reason why he came up to this conclusion, because the amount of people that are quote unquote Caucasian that he was seeing coming up with the E1B1A haplogroup, as he discussed here. He said this was originally thought to be a West African specific haplogroup. However, this has changed within the last few years. The influx of people who identify themselves as Caucasian are showing up with this haplogroup. So his way of trying to remedy this, remedy the perceived issue is just to say, oh, it's all of it's North African. And that's not true at all. You still have an E1B1A marker. You still have a Sub-Saharan African related marker. It is what it is. If you're in the Americas, you're in the States, most likely it came through West and Central Africa. Right? Most likely it came from there. You have some from North, some from East Africa. But majority, the bulk of it is going to come from a West and Central African source. With that, I'm going to conclude, man. People had sex, people reproduced, people had babies. Right? The people that are in this racial ethnic group are not all the same. They're not homogenous. As we showed, white Americans and Sub-Saharan African ancestry, there are quite a significant amount of them. And just because they look a certain way, have a certain cast, certain morphology, certain cranial metrics, certain hair type, certain eye color, that doesn't say shit about their ancestry. And you do have white Americans that are descendants of Sub-Saharan Africans. All the links to the articles discussed today are within the description of the video. I hope you guys learned something. And just remember, it's 7 candlesticks up, and I've been telling you niggas, it ain't a debate. It's a stick up gang.
What's up, baby? I ain't trying to do nothing but get my grown man no. I ain't trying to hurt you. Only if you want me to. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, what's happening, baby? I'm Lil Wayne from New Orleans. Fresh out the Navy, now the captain of my own team. Hop in this machine, vanish from the scene. God damn it, I'm so managed. Handle it like a standard. So put your panties in your pants by the trash can. Romance on the floor plans. Yeah, we hold hands while we rollin'. Just trying to keep up with the program. Just trying to sneak up on you like how you doing, ma'am. I'm an old soul and a young man. We got to it and we didn't stop till the birds hit the block, and she ain't never had it like that. Girl, you are so fine. I wish that I could get you away here, girl, tonight. So I could get my grown man on you. You don't know about it. I'm on my grown man. You don't know about it. I could get you away here, girl. You don't know about it. I'm on my grown man. You don't know about it. Now I don't really hit the club, but tonight I'll make an exception. For some reason I can't seem to keep my eyes out your direction. I'm looking at you so hard I could probably catch a charge. Feeling the way you walk when you move your booty, applause. Damn, I gotta keep my composure. Gotta attack my mission, handle business like a soldier. Young man, young money, but the money long. Currency, the hot spitter, so grown. And your perception of me is so wrong. Don't worry about what you heard about me and them other birds. Might have done a little dirt and left a few of them hurt, but whatever has occurred, they all got what they deserved. And you don't rock like them, I can see it in your eyes. If you ain't good for me, then you wearing a disguise. Cause tonight you looking like Miss Right, and I swore to be a player for life, but I changed for you. Girl, you are so fine. I wish that I could get you away here, girl, tonight. So I could get my grown man on you. You don't know about it. I'm on my grown man. You don't know about it. I could get you away here, girl. Real players. I'm on my grown man. You don't know about it. You ain't a woman, you a baby girl, living in the latest world, and I'm a grown man. The women understand. See what I go through, it's what I owe you. So you should throw that ass back to me right now. Yeah, fly boy baby, sit back, relax and cruise with a nigga, that's the nation's satisfaction. Whose is it, baby? She say, Weezy fucking baby. I say, yes and fucking D. She say, don't you ever leave. I say, but I got money on my mind. Then I tell her, never mind, and we do it one more time, yeah. For a large amount of time, long and won't stop till daytime come home. Yeah, girl, you are so fine. I wish that I could get you over here, girl, tonight. So I could get my grown man on with you. You don't know about it. I'm on my grown man. You don't know about it. I wish that I could get you over here, girl. You don't know about it. I'm on my grown man. You don't know about it. Grown man on you. Damn, look. that right there? That's the sunset, girl. Get your visor. Where's those Chanel shades that get you? You're always losing things, and I'm always buying new things. I come a long way, I remember that block? Look at you think you're all grown. You ain't a woman, you a baby girl, living in the ladies' world, and I'm a grown man. The women understand, see what I go through, it's what I owe you, and you should throw that ass back to me right now.